Today's fourth gospel passages capture that transition in the life of the disciples from physical contact with Jesus to a new kind of faith in a risen Lord. Thomas makes the transition from believing as a matter of physical observation to believing as a matter of spiritual truth. Eventually in this story, it is the community of believers, enlightened by the presence of the risen Lord, that Thomas comes to know Jesus at a level that eluded him when he knew Jesus in the flesh. Thomas, the doubter, came to belief by grasping the meaning of Jesus' death. And through that understanding, he received the divine life that was stronger than death. The basic message of this appearance story: it is not necessary to see him in the flesh. In fact, even those like Thomas who saw him in his pre-Easter days only understood him and believed when they contacted his spiritual presence within the believing community. So the experience of the risen Lord is not therefore relegated to the past. It is present and available when the disciples gather next week. The time and the date of the gathering is evening on that first day, the first day of the week. The obvious reference to the Genesis story. His presence will be known in that he brings peace to replace fear, even though the doors are locked. That's a big transition. Thomas could well have been the patron saint of the rep class of 1961. The German-American sociologist of religion, Peter Berger, might have advanced that canonization process when he wrote a book entitled In Praise of Doubt. In it, he writes, "If the danger of relativism to a stable society is an excess of doubt, the danger of fundamentalism is a deficit of doubt." Both extremes, extreme uncertainty and extreme certainty, are dangerous, and one should establish a middle position equidistant from relativism and fundamentalism. Now, amongst that band of disciples in the 1950s, then called the Church, there was a good dose of extreme certainty. And there were many locked doors. Answers were always preferred to questions. And there were answers for almost everything. For an entire semester every year, and for 2.5 hours every week, the rule was read and interpreted either by the rector or the vice rector of the seminary. for an entire student body, ranging in age from 14 to 20. Same room. Needless to say, questions were not entertained regarding the rule. St. Joseph's College in the late 1950s was a hermetically sealed universe when it came to faith and the practice of faith. Every public prayer ended with the doxology that captured this. For omnia saecula saeculorum. As it was in the beginning, is now, and will be forever. Amen. This was indeed a locked upper room. But in those late 50s, and more in the early 60s, a subtle shift began to take place. People began to ask questions, particularly questions about old answers. A new type of awareness was emerging, a historical awareness that suggested that maybe things were not always this way. And more importantly, perhaps they could change. Perhaps it had not been this way from the beginning. And maybe it could be different now. And more than likely, it won't be forever. What we had been told and seen as timeless and eternal was now becoming the subject of historical questioning. And these types of questions introduced ambiguity, change, and a certain disjunction from a very comfortable past. If the advent of a Catholic president marked a major transition in the country, historical questions, or perhaps more specifically, historical consciousness, marked a major transition in how the church began to see itself. Berger's middle position between relativism and fundamentalism was a very hard position to hold. Some people, like John Olivier, appeared to navigate the rapids of change well. He lived with me for 3 years at Santa Teresa Parish, and I once asked him how he made it through those troubling times of transition. And he told me very simply, martinis and plain chant. He loved both. I tried to find an example of this type of culture clash in the seminary, and I remembered a very specific scene from poetry class in 1960. Father Rock assigned each of us in that class to be ready with the 3-stanza poem for recitation in class. And he could call on you at any time for that recitation. On the second day, he called one Dennis Lucy, who strode to the front of the classroom in full confidence, slight smile on his rosy face, and he began. A poem by Robert Darren and Bertold Brecht. Took a deep breath, "Oh, the shark has much teeth, dear, and it shows them pearly white. Just a jackknife has old McHeath, babe, and he keeps it out of sight." He only got that one verse out. And an authoritative voice from the back of the room said, "Sit down, dear." I'm looking for somebody. Pop actually had a very good sense of humor, because he gave his penitent, one Michael McLaughlin, a 40 when 75 was passing. And he said, "Mac, you're a little under the line."